Doctor, let's talk about the future, because you made this hurricane analogy at the beginning of the show, and it's a fascinating one because, we know now that hurricanes, they come every year. Now, the severity varies, and then the big ones we hear about every 8 or 10 years. But from what I understand, you're telling us that this is now the new normal. We need to be ready for these varying degrees of pandemics to continue coming. And I think you're predicting the next one's going to be in sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe explain this new normal to us. But because I think a lot of people, and correct me if I'm wrong, think, oh, we just got to make it through the coronavirus and everything will be back to normal. Tell me how you feel about this.
Well, look, let's put it this way. 102 years ago, 1918, pandemic. If we were having this discussion then, the total population on the world was 1.8 billion people. As a species, Homo sapiens, took us 300,000 years. We emerged somewhere about 300,000 years ago. Took us 300,000 years to hit the 1 billion mark. In 10 decades, we've added another 6 billion people. And we'll add another 4 or 5, depending on what demographers are saying, by the end of this century. That incredible uptick in our presence on this planet doesn't come without a price. And part of that price is a disruptive effect on the ecosystems we live in. And one of the metrics of that disruption is increasing the frequency of interactive dynamics between us, our livestock, and wildlife. So right now, we're really looking at the consequence of the population explosion of the 20th century when we think about the coronaviruses and the influenza viruses. As we move further into this century, and we look at the epicenter for new population growth, it's not Asia, it's Africa. When we look at the 20th century, most of that population growth came out of Asia. When we look at the population growth of the 21st century, it'll be in Africa. And we think about mammalian and viral diversity, we're not going to get more diversity than in sub-Saharan Africa. So as populations grow, as ecosystems are disrupted, as our footprint expands in sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to begin seeing patterns of emergence, spillover, and spread, not dissimilar to what we've been seeing coming out of Asia. So the world is dynamic, it evolves, and the profile of the 21st century is very much going to be reflective of these very predictable, very understandable changes that are afoot. And very much like, again, weather forecasting. We know what these dynamics are. We know what the equivalent of changes in sea surface temperature, a big driver for hurricanes, atmospheric pressures. We understand the different variables to a really extraordinary degree for hurricanes, which allows us with multiple generations of modeling to be much more insightful about forecasting not just what a hurricane will look like, but what a hurricane season will look like. And we need equivalent data sets as we go forward into this century to be much more insightful, much smarter, and have the ability with this data to run lots of models. Right now, we are pitiful in terms of our ability to forecast with any reasonable precision. But with more data and more modeling, as we move over the course of this next decade, we can do two things. We can be much more insightful about where these events are most likely to unfold. But as I said, hurricanes we're not going to prevent. We can use this knowledge about where these dynamics are playing themselves out most significantly. And those dynamics are us, what we're doing, and we can change and mold and modify those. So we actually have the power to use this forecasting, not only to better prepare, we have this power of forecasting to prevent. And that is incredible. So the 21st century is different. These are not black swan events anymore. Think of them as gray rhino events. They are not that common, but clearly not that uncommon. And so we're going to be not just pandemics, epidemics, events that used to happen in one place of the world used to stay in that one place of the world because population movement was limited. But with population movement viruses that don't have pandemic potential. Pandemic potential means the ability to spread unchecked because of just the way they move from person to person. There are lots of viruses out there that are much more restricted, and they are more epidemic prone. But now an epidemic prone virus can get on an airplane, essentially hijacking a body and fly from one region of the world to the next. So we have increasing risk of pandemics, but I would say even more dramatically, increasing risk of global epidemics, which again will not only raise significant public health issues, but huge economic and social and security issues.
Sounds like a scary world to live in.
Well, let's be clear. It's a scary world if we don't take responsibility. It's not a scary world if we take responsibility. So let's own it and act on it.